Sure. So my name's Matthew Geer. I was born in Hastings in East Sussex in 1996. My parents, my dad was a firefighter, and my mum just sort of worked at the local supermarket. I had a really fantastic childhood growing up, sort of no problems or anything. And actually, I think my mental health was traumatic rather than sort of genetic or anything to do with upbringing. I'm a musician by trade, so I studied at Music Conservatoire, and I'm now doing a PhD, a doctoral degree in music and philosophy at Queen's University of Belfast. So my whole life is pretty much consumed at the moment by music and by philosophy, which is a really exciting distraction for me. And in my spare time, I love playing the piano, playing the double bass, playing the organ. I'm not very good double bassist at all, but I love playing it. And I like cycling. I like going on walks. Lots of different things like that. I currently live in London. Well, I live between London and Hastings, and interesting fact about me, I've got a younger brother who's 3 years younger to the day, which is quite exciting. I'm really, really close to him, and he's just my absolute rock. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think we should definitely have a session where we can listen to your music as well, and talk about how music and philosophy work together. That's very interesting, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a really interesting sort of dialogue between the two disciplines.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Uh, so, just for everyone at the event today, what would you tell, how would you explain your mental health condition to a layman? A lot of us, including myself, I don't fully understand, schizophrenia. So, any insights from you would really helpful.
Sure. So my specific diagnosis is called schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, which is quite a sort of wordy title. But what it really means is that I've got symptoms of schizophrenia and symptoms of bipolar, which are sometimes known as psychotic symptoms and mood symptoms. So if I just concentrate on the psychotic symptoms first, this means I have hallucinations, delusions, and confused or muddled thoughts. They're the three main things. So with the hallucinations, I have mainly auditory hallucinations. So I hear voices. I specifically hear five voices, and I also hear crowds of people. They feel like they're coming from the outside world, rather than sort of in my head. And I hear them on a daily basis. Very occasionally, I see things as well, which can be quite traumatic, but that's not very often. In terms of the delusions, I don't actually have delusions at the moment, but I have done in the past when I was in hospital. I was admitted into hospital for about 4 or 5 months in 2017. And I had unusual and paranoid beliefs where I believed that during a manic episode, I was the president of a country. During a depressive episode, I thought that people were trying to hurt and kill me. And then the confused and muddled thoughts are quite self-explanatory. I get a little bit confused, sometimes a little bit muddled. My speech gets a little bit muddled. Sometimes I find it difficult to have a full conversation when I'm hearing voices. So they're the more psychotic aspect of the schizoaffective disorder. And when it comes to the mood aspect of the disorder, I have the bipolar type, bipolar 1 type specifically, which is combination of manic episodes and depressive episodes. So a lot of people have heard the term mania, but might not necessarily know what it means. And it's a combination of symptoms where you have racing thoughts, a lot of energy, very goal-orientated activity, teleological activity, working towards very specific goals. For example, you might have a business idea that you want to get off the ground, very little or no sleep, fast-paced talking, spending a lot of money, and having reckless behavior. So you might smoke, you might take a lot of drugs, things like that. And you can have full-blown manic episodes, which include psychosis as well, where you hold unusual or delusional beliefs, or you can have what's called hypermania, which is where you have, it's sort of bipolar light. It's not full-blown mania, but you don't have the psychosis aspect, but you still do have that rapid cycle of thoughts and very energetic, full of ideas and and you have the sort of the ongoing impetus to do lots of things at once. So that's the sort of mania side. The depressive side is a little bit like episodic clinical depression. So I have quite increased sleep. I have an extremely low mood, lack of energy, lack of motivation to do things, feel very tearful. I can feel very suicidal sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And it's, as I say, it's very similar to sort of clinical depression in that respect. These episodes usually last about 2 to 3 weeks for me, but they can last anywhere up to 6 months usually. I think the longest manic episode I've had is a couple of months during a hospital admission. That was more of a hypermanic episode, but I had a bit of psychosis in that as well. So that's really my diagnosis in a nutshell. It's quite confusing, but it's pretty much just schizophrenia and bipolar into one illness.
Yeah. What I really liked is that, you have so much insight into what goes, and what you feel like and what delusions that you have. So that is very interesting to know from someone who goes through it as well. So like I did a lot of CBT therapy when I was in the hospital. I did Now I do a one-to-one therapy with a therapist, and talk about what I'm feeling. Do you Is there any kind of therapy that has helped you, or do you rely on medication as well that helps you?
I tend to find a balance between the two. So I do engage with cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically geared towards psychosis. So that's towards hearing voices mainly. And it's this idea that you're not being persuaded by the voices. You're listening to the voices. You're giving them time to speak, but it's the way that you react to the voices that changes, not necessarily trying to change the voices themselves. So I found that extremely helpful. That's also to do with meditation-based therapy as well, which I found very, very helpful, and mindfulness. In terms of the medication side, I do take medication. I'm on an antipsychotic. I've been on quite a few antipsychotics, like I'd say most people suffering from schizophrenia have. Usually takes quite a long time to find the right sort of dose and the right medication. So I'm on an antipsychotic. I'm on a mood stabilizer. My one is lithium. It's probably the most popular one, and it's been there for sort of 25, 30 years. It's been used for bipolar disorder, and it's very effective, specifically within the manic episodes. I'm also on an antidepressant, quite a low dose. Antidepressants can be sometimes quite dangerous in bipolar disorder, because if you think about it, if you have an antidepressant, then you have a manic episode, it can boost your mood up even more and you can become even more manic. But there's growing evidence to suggest that isn't necessarily the case. And in the last 10 years or so, psychiatrists have started to prescribe selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for use in bipolar. So the specific one I'm on is citalopram, which is, as I say, a very low dose though, and that does help with the mood disorder. There are other antidepressants such as lamotrigine, which is more of a mood stabilizer, but it does help with the more depressive side of the bipolar aspect of the condition. I'm also on an anti-anxiety medication because I suffer from anxiety, which I guess is quite understandable, hearing voices all the time. And then I'm also, quite interestingly, I'm on some medication to help with my lower and upper GI symptoms, my gastrointestinal symptoms. And there's a very interesting link between people having functional dyspepsia and functional gastric symptoms such as Crohn's disease, such as irritable bowel syndrome, and that, who also have mental illness, and that's a sort of growing link, which my gastroenterologist says will potentially be a medical discipline within itself within the next 20 years or so. So they're the medications I'm on, but as I say, it's a balance for me between the sort of more talking therapies of side, seeing a clinical psychologist, and also having a sort of stable medication routine.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I once heard in the hospital there was a dietitian, and she said that serotonin is produced in the gut. It's not produced anywhere else. And I have hypothyroidism as well, so I have gut issues anyway. And when I eat healthy, I exercise, and my gut is okay, I do feel a lot, my mood is lifting a bit as well. So yeah, definitely. I know that you do a lot of advocacy work as well, trying to raise awareness. So we would love to hear about that as well, and how that helps you with your mental well-being.
Sure. So my first experience with advocacy work was in 2018. So during the 2017 hospital admission that I had, that was about 4 or 5 months, I kept a diary of entries, which I documented all of my manic and depressive ideas, such as being in charge of a country called No Ipsel, where I was head spy, and all of these depressive ideas where I thought that Adolf Hitler was trying to control me and take over my life and trying to hurt me. And through that and through my music, I wrote an opera, and that was performed in 2018 along with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And we invited Johnny Benjamin, MBE, to come and talk to that. And so that was my first experience with advocacy within the mental health. I most recently did a podcast with a fantastic musician called Hattie Butterworth, called Things That Musicians Don't Talk About. And that episode was on schizophrenia and psychosis and tertiary Franciscanism, which is very important to me. And that really opened my eye into sort of campaigning for better mental health provisions in the UK and abroad, and also just getting the message out there of sort of things will be okay, and to talk about things as well. And so I set up an Instagram page, Schizophrenic and Loving Life, because I wanted it to be a really positive thing to look at schizophrenia for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Oh my God, I would. Is that opera available anywhere for us to watch? Or
It's on my website.
okay,
Yeah, so www.mattgeer.co.uk, and if you go
okay.
onto the watch page, you can watch my opera, and it includes the talk with Johnny Benjamin as well at the beginning, which is a fascinating talk.
Okay, that's just a couple of years, and you have achieved so much. And I just feel like this. I didn't know that this conversation is going to be so positive, and I'm just like, you're fooling me with like energy that, oh my God, there's like so much more that can be done. Like amazing work. In the beginning, you said that you're very close to your brother, and you had a really good childhood as well. So in terms of support from family and friends, I feel like I have to help them in order for them to help me. So I specifically tell my fiance, do this when I need support, or my parents like, do this when I need support. So how does that work for you? And any advice that you would give to people listening to you today?
Sure. So, I mean, my parents, my family, my brother, and that have been supportive, massively supportive from day one. When I was admitted into hospital, I actually was embarrassed to say that I was in a psychiatric unit at first, and I didn't tell my dad. And then I found him knocking at the door of the psychiatric unit on day 2, and saying, "We've run up every single hospital in London and finally found you. It's just good to know that you're okay and you can talk to us about anything," which really changed my mindset, because schizophrenia to me at that point, and I should just veer off a little bit and say, from about the age of 14 or 15, I think I knew I had schizophrenia, but I didn't want to admit it to myself, because I knew I was hearing voices and I knew what they were. I wasn't sort of completely stupid. So my family from day one have been completely supportive. In terms of friends, it's been a little bit more difficult. Joining university, it's difficult to know when to tell someone that you have schizophrenia, because there's such a massive stigma attached with it still, specifically with the idea that suddenly you're absolutely fine, and then suddenly you're just going to burst out into a massive anger or violent rage, the sort of axe-wielding psychopath analogy.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to tell people, and it's quite scary to tell people at first. So I used to treat it a little bit like coming out as gay. I'd say sort of when the time is right, I would say the S word and say, actually, there's something I need to tell you. I'm schizophrenic. um, and over time, I've learned not to do that, but actually just to steer the conversation onto mental health and then just say, well, actually, I have this condition called schizoaffective disorder. And actually, schizoaffective disorder, saying that word is a little bit like sort of dampening the strings of a piano rather than bashing them really hard because they don't know what it means. So then you can say, actually, well, it's a combination of voices of mania of depression, and you can say all these things without actually having to say the word schizophrenia, which I guess is a little bit of a cop out. But for me, that works really well. I'd say to anyone who is telling people that they're schizophrenic or suffering from these symptoms for the first time even, I'd say just go for it. And actually, you want to be surrounded by people who support you. And if someone's very averse to it, that isn't your fault. That isn't anything you've done wrong. That's potentially trauma in their childhood that's led to that. That's things that they've read on the news, because there's so much things on the news about, I mean, the only time you ever hear about schizophrenia is through criminality on the news. It's through a schizophrenic has killed 3 people in a gun attack in America or something like that, or there's been a mass shooting, oh, they had mental health difficulties. You never hear about the positive aspects of schizophrenia on the news, which is something I absolutely, with all my heart, love to change and actually bring some more positive vibes to the word schizophrenia and everything surrounding schizophrenia, the whole sort of community surrounding it. And I think that's what like sort of just another illness is doing, and the work I've done with the music side of things is trying to do. So yeah, I just say just be honest and open about things, talk about things with people, but really remember to explain things, because you've got to remember that people don't necessarily have the same amount of knowledge and education that you do on mental illness, and their initial impressions might be very negative, which is understandable because the news is shrouded in negativity around schizophrenia.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we close this chat, any parting words or any advice or anything you would like to give to anyone here today?
I think there's one quote that I'd like to give. Well, it's not a quote; it's an analogy, and I'm very very disappointed to say I can't remember who said it, but it was related to depression, but I found it to work with most mental health conditions, and it was to think of a mental health condition like the rain. And there's 3 aspects to this. Firstly, it's absolutely real. When it's raining, it is raining. There's no doubt about that. The rain is real. You can touch it and you can feel it, and it's very tactile and it's wet, and it is the rain. So when you're having a bipolar episode, when you're hearing voices, when you're feeling depressed, it is real. It is absolutely real what you're feeling. It's not in your head. The second thing is that it's there's nothing you can do about it at the time. So when it's raining, you can't just suddenly stop the rain. You can't say, oh, I don't want it to rain anymore, and then it will stop. When you're depressed, you can't just say, I don't want to be depressed anymore, otherwise no one would be depressed. You can't just suddenly say, I don't want to hear voices anymore, and then the voices stop, otherwise no one would hear voices. So you've got to accept that, and that's a very, very difficult thing to accept, but you have to accept that in getting better. And the third thing, and this is the most cheesy, cliche bit of the analogy, is that the sun will come out at the end. It will eventually stop raining. You will stop hearing voices, you will stop having depression, and you will have episodes and times of the day when you feel a little bit better. And you've got to really, really concentrate on that. So 3 things: it's real, there's nothing you can do about it when it's happening, but it will get better. And I think that's an amazing analogy to sort of to remember when you're having mental health difficulties.